And now to begin the webinar, we welcome from Michigan State University, Dr. Judith Lin. Dr. Lin, the screen is yours.
Well, good evening and good afternoon to those on the West Coast. Welcome to the Society for Vascular Surgery Health Information Technology event on Surgeon Innovator, Startups, Entrepreneurship, and Venture Capital. Today, I have the distinct honor to co-moderate this session with Dr. Shiv Nikam, who is a vascular surgeon at Geisinger, Wyoming Valley, member of the SVS Health IT Committee, founder and CEO of Mundi, a digital app for virtual care. The SBS webinar is focused on the use of developing new technology, funding, and bringing these products to market. We are joined today by 5 additional distinct panelists with a variety of expertise in startups, entrepreneurship, and venture capital. Our first speaker is Dr. Anaida Dua, who is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and a vascular surgeon at the Mass General Hospital. She has been working in the innovator space for over a decade and is a serial innovator of devices and instruments as a practicing vascular surgeon. She is also the creator of a walking app being reviewed by Boston Scientific and gives regular lectures on innovation at the Northeastern Bioengineering College. Our second speaker is Dr. Hari Raha, who started his general surgery residency and went on to be founder of Disio Health, a company providing real-time view of patient story and status changes using clinical surveillance for inpatient monitoring and providing guideline-driven treatment guidance. So next, also joining us is Dr. Dave Karagupta, who is a physician founder and CEO of Alio, a wearable technology company leveraging AI to gain insights into clinical grade real-time data. Next, Dr. Pratak Kawankar is a serial medtech entrepreneur and an innovator with decades of experience in the development and commercialization of medical technologies. He founded and led many medtech startups and helped University of Pittsburgh on product commercialization. He is the current VP of Product Development at Incube Lab, an incubator in San Antonio, Texas. Pratak has been instrumental in taking many companies to success exits, including IPOs. Our last speaker is Dr. Sophia Mccoy. Sophia is an assistant professor in the Department of Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgery at the McGovern Medical School and the University of Texas Health Sciences Center at Houston, UT Health. She's the founder and CEO of Voipos. Voipos is building a voice-enabled application with seamless integration into the existing electronic medical record, creating an intelligent EMR. Voipos will allow physicians to perform their entire patient reporting task from diagnosis to discharge from their mobile device with all voice-activated commands. This type of workforce automation differentiate them from competitors in this space. They're excited about their progress and are looking forward to the future. So without further ado, I will turn over the screen to our first speaker, Dr. Dua.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lin, and I really appreciate this invitation. I'm so thrilled to be speaking today about this topic, which is really near and dear to my heart. I asked to go first because I really wanted to lay the groundwork about how to innovate in vascular surgery. Essentially, as a vascular surgeon at Mass General now and previously at Stanford for training, and before that at the Medical College of Wisconsin for general surgery, there really was very little time to do this. I mean, there were ideas flying into my head at all times, but it was that practical application that was so difficult. And we know, as surgeons, when we read something in a book and when we obviously go to the operating room and do it, they are really 2 different worlds. And so I kind of want to use my time today to really get into the nitty-gritty about how you take an idea, real practical tips from inception all the way to market, and some of the pitfalls that can occur with that type of movement. So I'm going to just take a second here. I have no disclosures that are relevant to this talk. So just to begin with, I want to lay the groundwork for why you should listen to me at all, and not to be so loud and proud about it. But as I said, I am a vascular surgeon, but that's not good enough. You also have to have a little bit of kind of extra in this space to have failed essentially and know what that feels like and know why that happened and how you can learn from it. So as Dr. Lin said, I am part of the creation of an app that allows patients to track their steps, and ultimately the goal is to create an algorithm that can determine when a patient is about to have a graft that fails by using a correlate between how they walk and ultimately how far they've been walking over like a trended time period. So that's one thing that we're working on. Another thing that I have created is a thrombolysis device that's just here in the middle. That's the thing that's under review with a number of companies right now. And a lot of what I'll talk about today is about that experience, because it's the idea that, a surgeon comes up with an idea of how to make something better, how to implement that particular thing. My first invention ever actually was a dissector. It's called the Dua dissector. It's essentially for taking out vein, and actually can be used for inguinal hernia repairs of all things. And the reason I bring that up is because this was an invention that was not patented, but still very useful. And I'll talk about that as we move forward. And finally, I just have some test tubes over here just to show that while I was at UT Houston with a group of people, we came up with basically a special blood test that could allow someone to determine within a few hours what type of bugs are in someone's blood. So we don't have to wait for culture anymore, which obviously would be a big step since culture and sensitivity data is something that's 200 years old. But there was a long process and many things learned from that as well. So the long and short of it is that I have a couple of patents here and there. I've been through the process. I've lost a lot of money. And so I want to share some of that experience with you. So the objectives of the talk are, number one, to really discuss why surgical innovation matters and what's different about the 2021 climate. We're not in Leonardo da Vinci's time anymore. We're not even in DeBakey's time anymore, where you could just take something from the lab and go put it in a patient, because right after that, you're going to jail. So basically, there's a different way to start approaching this, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to talk about how the medical innovation space is a little bit different, and how you therefore take a product in the medical space from inception to market, which is very different actually than building Tesla and bringing that to market. And finally, I want to talk about some mistakes, stuff I've learned personally and stuff that's out there in the medical innovation space, just to bring it into your mind. So this really needs no introduction. And one of our panelists actually is talking about making this better, which is the electronic medical record. Everybody hates it. It's been the cause of suicide in physicians, burnout in physicians, and yet it was started with all good intentions. Somebody just tried to make the world a better place, but they essentially failed. And why? Because they didn't have the collaboration that was necessary to really get a product that worked for the people who are ultimately going to be using it. And why is that important? It's important because if you don't know who your target audience is from day one, you are going to waste a lot of time and money. And then it's very difficult to pivot because you've already hemorrhaged so much cash into doing something that it's now challenging to move places. So this is a great quote that I like actually from Elon Musk that talks about really what the difficulty is in the surgical innovation space, which is that essentially we've been doctors for hundreds of years, right? And there's something that's out there for everything. May not be good. For example, culture and sensitivity for blood tests, not great, but you know what? It works. What's wrong with it? And that's what makes medical innovation so challenging, because you're not coming up with something that's just new. You're coming up with something that has to replace the old and be more cost effective, and you got to get doctors to take it on. So it's actually the betterment of a need, and that's what's really challenging, because not only do you have to create something, but you have to challenge the status quo. It's not good enough to be cool. You also have to be financially efficient and something that people would want. And that's what brings me to the value proposition. That is the fundamental difference between 2021 medical innovation and the history of time. Essentially, you have to offer something that's better, more cost effective, and that your customers will want. And you basically do have three people in the medical innovation space. You have the doctor, you have the insurance company, and you have the hospital. The patient is actually on the side because the patient and the doctor are kind of together, ideally wanting the best outcome there. So where do you even start? Let's say you have an idea, you scribbled it down on a napkin, you're like, I hate this clamp, how do I make it better? This is something that I learned while I was at Stanford, this idea of the bio-design mantra. It's just something to kind of revisit repeatedly when you have something in mind. The first phase being the identify phase. You have to identify something that is a compelling need. And once you find that compelling need, you have to think, is it really compelling, or do I, again, just think this is cool? You also have to really start thinking upfront who your market is and what kind of money you're going to be investing. At that point, the key is to build a sketch. Build a sketch of what you want to do. If it's an idea, draw it out. If it's a device, draw it out. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to exist. Once it exists, you need to create it or prototype it. And you don't have to do it personally. What I did actually is use this design company. I'm just giving you an example, but they were wonderful, called Spec Design, where I literally go to them, we sign NDAs, which are non-disclosure agreements, and they build my product for me. A lot of these people are engineers who actually went to school to do specifically this. They're not going to take your idea, and now you have a prototype in your hand that you don't have to go through the university for, so they don't actually take it from you. Once you've essentially done the invention phase, now it's time to keep testing. And there are going to be 1,000 naysayers. People are going to say, this is bad. You could make this better. You could add this feature. Do not do it. Never, ever change your idea to suit essentially a different concept. You want to keep it as clear as possible without the features. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to work. The features, the bells and whistles, the interface can all come later. After this, the implementation phase is next, where you have to actually take your concept and make it into a real product, which usually means some type of benchtop testing. And at this point, you can actually come to companies and ask them if they'd like to license your product, because ideally at this point, you would have had a patent in place. So medical device development is a little bit different in that cost is really key, which is an easy thing to say, but is a hard thing to understand. And the key behind that is to keep the features down and actually stick with just the materials and actually stick with the concept that you had from the beginning, instead of trying to make it more fancy to get investors. Investors are very clever. They just want to know, is it going to work? And is your market there? Because that's what they care about. You got to move out of the doctor mindset of like, this is good for the patient, to thinking, is this good for society? And if it's good for society, it will be something that adds value to the market, and it will be something that is cost effective, because that is fundamental to getting to market. Now, what are the few inventor mistakes that we can talk about that people make as they move forward? I want to talk about 5 of them specifically. Number 1, putting the patent before the horse, so to speak. What does that mean? You have an idea, you go right to your lawyer and you say, I want to patent this. First of all, let me advise you, get a medical patent lawyer if you're working with this. It's not any lawyer. It's not the person who makes your will. It's a medical patent lawyer. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me and I'll tell you who to speak to. I have a couple, of course, that I work with. They are expensive, but they can do a patent search for you, and then they can determine whether or not your material is patentable. When I made that test to check for blood, we thought we were so amazing. We've got these RNA, DNA, factors that we can look at to see if things are actually going to work. And ultimately, what ended up happening is when we went to patent it, literally that month, the United States government had changed the rules to say you can no longer patent material that is biologically available. That would be DNA and RNA. So we had to change it to a methods patent. We had to do it quick. And that's something none of us knew. That's something a lawyer can only help you with. The other thing is, remember, patenting it is one thing, but actually getting freedom to operate. So actually taking your device and being able to use it in society is something different. These are 2 independent things, and a lawyer can take you through all of that. Second mistake, overestimating your market size. I am a vascular surgeon. I live and breathe vascular surgery, but I also know that vascular surgery cannot compete with microbiology or HIV, for example, as a market. And so you need to know, hey, I'm making this device. It's cool. It works. It's even cost effective. But is the company really going to throw their weight behind it, because you might have overestimated the market size? And this is where you need somebody like an MBA or somebody who actually knows how to look at the product, how to look at the market, and how to do a proper analysis before you start investing money into something. Next thing, I know we're doctors. I know we think we can do it all. You literally cannot. If ever you learn about collaboration, it is in the invention space, because the lawyer, the business person, the doctor all have to come together to really make the best product that can actually make it to market. So do not try to do everything yourself. Go to your local engineering college and ask for people who are interested. Try to collaborate and really get a product, but make sure that you sign those NDAs and that you do not give up pieces of your pie. The other thing you really can't do in this space is just trust everybody. You got to be business savvy about it. The next thing is, don't perfect things. Essentially, create a basic prototype and start going to market and start talking about it. Because if you try to make it fancy, make it beautiful, change the font, change the color, you waste time, you waste money, and it makes no difference ultimately, because all people are going to want to know is, does it work in its bare bones form? Once you take it to market, that's a different story. And finally, you have to know about selling. So from the very beginning, think to yourself, am I trying to create a company here around my product? Or am I trying to get a patent and a device that then I sell the patent, or I license the device to somebody like a Boston Scientific, a Cook, a Medtronic, who then take it, do the benchtop testing, do the marketing, and send it out because they have the channels. Think about that distribution early, because it will save you a lot of heartache. And you really need to think to yourself that this is something that's going to be a lifelong investment if you do start a company, versus if you do something like licensing, you can potentially keep your day job and continue to do this. Finally, really important to know, you're going to fail. You're going to fail repeatedly. People are going to be naysayers. Everybody says that. Steve Jobs says that. The Tesla people say that. I mean, we know that. There's no instant gratification here. You're talking about years, but ultimately, if it does hit, you could change the lives of people essentially even after you die. I always say this quote to people down here that I started working as an attending at 35. And even if I work to 70 and perform 10 operations a week, I'm only going to help around 20,000 people. But if I invent something that really works, I can help millions of people even after I'm gone. And that's why this is such an important space, because we have the knowledge that we need to bring together and bind with our engineering colleagues and our business colleagues to ultimately be able to do something great for the world. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye.
Hey, Anahita, that was wonderful. You know, all of us need talks from people who are experienced like you and experience these challenges. A quick question, you know, what comes to our mind is you work at Harvard, so a big umbrella to work under. Can you talk briefly, we maybe have a minute or two, about your entrepreneurial journey at Harvard as to how do you manage your conflicts? Were there contractual agreements you had to work with? Were there positives and negatives of working with Harvard? Just briefly, if you could elaborate on it.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So it's well known, this is no secret, that pretty much any academic institution you work for, especially the big gun ones that know what they're doing in this space because they have many people who invent, have ironclad contracts, essentially when you sign even with the place, that say that pretty much if you invent something there, some proportion of it is going to be owned by the institution. That proportion is negotiable though. That's something that you can go to them and you can say, I think that this is going to work. I've invested this much of my money. Tell me exactly what you're going to take from me if this hits or doesn't. I've been at places where they've said, go do whatever you want. NCW being the place where when I created that dissector, I actually signed a contract with them before I even started that said they release me of anything to do. So if this takes off, they have nothing to do with it. Harvard and Stanford were not like that. Harvard and Stanford said, we're not going to help you, but if you makes it, we're coming for you. So as long as you know that, but then on the other hand, I would argue that being in these institutions afford you extreme resources in terms of money and in terms of connections. There is something to be said about sitting in front of a venture capitalist and saying, I'm from Harvard. And so if that gets you to the next step, it's worthwhile, in my opinion. So there are pros and cons. Really, it's dependent on your own institution. And before you start even going down that line, you should go to every institution will have a office that actually focuses on patents and focuses on this type of thing. You need to sit down with somebody, and they're usually very welcoming because they know that you might have something good. 15-minute interview, just having a conversation with them about what the rules are. You probably will need to sign an NDA before you start. And then depending on the rules of your institution, you can navigate what the next steps would be. But they do help you with connections and other elements. So it is worthwhile doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dua, for a great foundation on innovation. So let's move on to our next speaker, Dr. Hari Raha.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Sorry, I was talking there for a second without the audio working. Appreciate the introduction, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my background and how I got to this point. To kind of set the stage here. I'm from the Texas area and worked at or attended the University of Texas Austin. And prior to going to medical school, I worked as a software developer, thought that would be what I would do full time. But then, circumstances changed. I got interested in medicine, switched over and, ended up in Texas Tech and in El Paso for my third and fourth year, and then general surgery residency. But I kind of took a different track, which was after I went into the lab after my PGY 2-year for translational research and worked under a NIH T32 grant around informatics. And part of our lab actually took emerging technology fund money from the state of Texas. And part of the requirement for taking that was to commercialize the technology that we were building. So what we did was, built dashboards that run in the emergency room. So we weren't connected to the EMR, weren't connected to the vital signs, but we hired people under the grant just to put in data into the system to see it show up on the dashboard. And while we were doing all of that, we started figuring out in the background, how do we automate this? How do we make it live so that people can, manage trauma patients, in the ER. And where we found it to be the most useful is actually in the ICU, because all of the data was already collated and brought together. So we spun the company out into a commercial entity with a seed round from some investors not related to healthcare, but in oil and gas, who my co-founder knew. And so that's how this whole thing came together. And we were in a space where software was not something that had a clear path through the FDA. So we decided to embrace what the FDA was offering in terms of protections and so forth, which is not something a lot of companies have done. And one of the things that I think it does, and this is I know a lot of people have frustrations with getting clearance, and as Dr. Dua mentioned, in like an implantable device, there's no question it has to be done, right? If it goes inside a patient, you have to get FDA clearance, but software doesn't touch a patient. When we filled out our FDA clearance, paperwork, they asked for our pest control policy, things like that, where you're just like, this is clearly they're thinking hardware. And so software was something unique. So we ended up being one of the prototypes for how they manage software as a medical device. And especially in the clinical decision support area, we went to conferences where the FDA was using us as an example without our knowledge of how they presented, which was good, but also frustrating to be the people blazing the trail. So currently we are monitoring the entire hospital for taking data out of the medical record, pulling it out, and processing it through algorithms that are national standards of care, identifying patients who are decompensating on the floor. We had a mortality rate reduction of about 47% on patients who had met these criteria, and alerted the doctors, or the rapid response team, and they'd go assess the patient. Stroke management, we identify patients who have had enter the emergency room. They've got a CT stroke protocol. We identify and make sure that the TPA gets put in. And so that workflow management, we reduced the time to administration for TPA from a median of 60 minutes to under 30 minutes, which is, obviously there's a lot of moving pieces in there. And that's, part of the software is just identifying who all needs to be alerted at what time. Similar things that we've done in the ICU. And then recently we went into the labor and delivery space, and have been in the neuro ICU as well. So one of the things that I found interesting about this entire process was we started in the emergency room specifically around trauma, because that's what, our grant funding was and where our research was. And we found so many use cases outside of that. Like labor and delivery was one of the areas I never thought we would see any benefit. But I think becoming an entrepreneur, it starts, with, and Dr. Dua did a great job kind of explaining this, is your eyes have to be open to where is the value that you can create, not just for your patients, not just for, the physicians, but everybody has to win. And when everybody wins, that's how value gets created for the whole group, right? The EMR came in with a promise. The promise has been unfulfilled. And so there's a lot of opportunities to fulfill what we had originally thought the EMR was for, which was for clinical improvement. And it's really become a filing cabinet for documentation. And so I see a lot of areas where we can improve upon that need to be, a focus for people who are trying to, invent things to improve your workflow and so forth. So, currently we have raised $18 million to date, and we're planning a Series C in 2022 for around 25 million. So just to, kind of wrap up here, the lessons learned, when we started this process, a lot of the discussion was, is this a product or is this a company that we're trying to create? And, when you're talking in the software space, you can license your software to somebody, but software needs constant improvement. It's something that requires a certain amount of capital, a certain level of effort. So there are things that you can build in the lab, but spinning it out into a company or making it a product that you license out is a lot more complicated than, that thought has to go into what you're going to do and plan out how you're going to do it. one of the biggest issues with this in the product space versus company space is, who are you going to target if you're going to license your software to somebody? Is it going to be licensed to the EMR? It's going to live inside the EMR, that kind of thing. And then you have to be prepared that the EMR companies may take a cut of your revenue, as part of their app store or something like that. But the main thing I want to emphasize to you is that, doctors want to improve medical care. They want to improve their quality of life. But if they want to do that, they need to step out of the comfort zone that they've created in terms of, I see my patients, I do, my research, whatever it is. Innovation in healthcare is going to come from physicians. There are engineers out there, there are people, but they don't understand the medical side of this. And so if you want to be successful, it's going to come from what you see every day in front of you and taking that and translating it into a product, a company, and that kind of thing. And that's how I think you can solve this, because I see a lot of doctors who are very frustrated. I've lost, unfortunately lost friends, to the burnout, process and worse. And, I built this company to improve the quality of life for everybody, that works in the hospital. And that's really what drives me every day. I love taking care of patients and I love that, but my physician colleagues are the people that I really want to help, with this so that they don't burn out and that they can do their job effectively. And so that's not going to come from the hospital administrators, the hospital itself. They don't have an innovation mindset. Doctors need to lead the way when they want to innovate, and they need to be open to innovation in their own practice. In order for us to improve, get better, we can't think, the old study that they've always quoted to us in residency was your prescribing practices don't change after you leave residency. And, that's the innovation mindset, right? We have to always be learning, improving, and so forth. And the final thing is, if you decide to go step out and do this, separating your practice, your clinical practice, which I have, I see patients 2 days a week, and doing your physician, the physician hat that you wear at a company, it's hard, right? And you have to learn, a lot of us grew up in we have type A personalities and we want to control everything and do everything. There's some things that you need to control and you have to wear your clinical hat, and other things you have to let people, do that for you, the business folks, the lawyers, and that kind of stuff. And you have to know enough to know whether you're going to be cheated by these people and stuff like that. So it's best to find partners who can help you with this, and diversifying your skill set so you can make this happen. So it's a lot of things that I had to learn, the hard way, and made a lot of mistakes. But as you get better at this and you start understanding it, you have a much broader scope to actually succeed here. So, I'll stop right there in the interest of time, and I'm, happy to take questions at the end.
Hey, Hari, thank you for a very interesting talk, very insightful. Just one quick question that comes to mind, and I'll blend it in with the question that one of our audience members asked. Carlo Angelo also asked a question. He's a resident. And his question is also about the same thing that I meant to ask you. When you make a decision to move from clinical to entrepreneurial, especially something that's busy full-time, is that a quick decision for you? Did you go back and forth in your decisions? Did you think about your work-life balance? Was it a evolving balance? And was this something quick one-time decision that you made and said, oh, this is mutually exclusive, I need to do this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I get that question from a lot of people who ask, physician entrepreneurs who are thinking, I want to step out and do this. And, I truly believe that I was put in, born to take care of patients. I love it. It is my passion. I have no problem waking up at 3:30 in the morning to see people and do that. And I take calls all night. I love taking care of patients. It's very hard to step away from that, from something you love, to do something that will help a lot of people, but you don't necessarily see the benefits directly, right? It's very satisfying to see somebody in the emergency room who's very sick, you take care of them and they get better. Like Dr. Dua concluded as well, and I couldn't agree with her more, my software sees, hundreds of thousands of patients a year, and I'm able to help them. I don't necessarily know their names or know, who they are, but it's a very gratifying, experience to be able to help somebody, remotely. I mean, there are people who are walking out of the hospital today I've never met that I've helped. And it's a very important thing that we have to do if we want to make medicine better is take on that burden ourselves, because it's not going to come from elsewhere. It's going to come from us, and if we want it to do it right.
Great. That's a fantastic vision and your personal experience. So let's move on to see what Dr. Dave Karagutla will inform us about lessons learned from doing entrepreneurship the wrong way.
Indeed. Thanks so much, everyone. It's an amazing opportunity to be here and get a chance to share a little bit of my story and how Aleo has built a product that we think has an amazing opportunity to help folks. So I'm co-founder and CEO of the company, and we are currently under review with the FDA. But from the standpoint of what we do, we provide an end-to-end remote patient monitoring platform. So we start off with a wearable that the patient wears. They don't have to do anything to collect the data. They're just going about living their life, doing whatever they need to do. And then it moves into being able to process that data in the cloud and turn that into actionable clinical data. So we monitor vascular access, fluid overload, electrolyte imbalances within an initial target market around dialysis patients. And then given the fact that we've been able to build some of these algorithms around detecting access failure, we've shown that we can detect something similar in PAD for detecting bypass or graft failure. We can do fluid overload in dialysis patients. We're doing the same in heart failure patients as well. And at the end of the day, making sure that it's the right data at the right time in one place for all the stakeholders so that it's easy to use, because the bits and bytes in the middle don't break, right? It's the people on either end that do. And we've heard about physician burnout. We've heard about the need to make sure that patients are compliant, that physicians are engaged, and that's certainly important along the way. At the end of the day, there is also an amazing opportunity to do unique tech. So as we kind of heard, hardware, you can patent, right? You can certainly build out ways to do so. We have about 30 patents in process right now at Aleo. But the software side, how we actually translate that raw data into meaningful metrics, is actually all trade secret. So software is hard to patent. You don't necessarily want to give away what you do. We kind of look at it like a two-layer moat of like a recipe in terms of, we'll give you the ingredient list, but we're not going to tell you how we bake the cookies and make the secret sauce. And that's certainly been pretty valuable for us as we've continued to maintain our technical advantage moving forward and going beyond where most of the wearables are today in terms of your basic vitals, maybe one, two extra metrics, into things that aren't being done non-invasively, looking at things like flow and stenosis in terms of the vascular world, being able to look at potassium non-invasively at an accuracy that's comparable to a blood draw without needing to rely on something like an ECG as a lagging indicator. So pulling all of that together has really meant that we've had to build a journey that has been pretty exciting along the way. And I think it starts off with knowing your why. There's two buckets, right? There's the why of money, power, prestige. This is going to be exciting. Everybody else is doing it. But I think there's the other bucket of a burning desire to solve a big problem. That's certainly where I started, was preparing to head off to a surgical residency with vascular in mind, and just kept seeing this problem of, we put these really expensive things into patients, we wave goodbye, and they come back to the ER days, weeks, months later. And in many ways, I feel like we've treated a symptom, but not the underlying disease. So we know that if we monitor these patients, that there's a clinical workflow to solve the problem. But what's the real issue? If the real issue is a sampling error problem, you can solve that with sensors and software. And so that became the burning problem to solve. And that's a desire that lasts more than a week, right? I think, as Amy Porterfield said it best, if you can't stop thinking about it, don't stop working for it. And so I think that's really important to know along the way, is know your why. Next but not, is certainly something that we have built even into the Aleo logo. The reason that O has kind of these four components, we call them the 4 Ps, is the patient, the physician, the provider, and the payer. Especially for a product like ours that requires patient compliance to get the results that you need to improve their life and also improve the patient and physician's clinical journey. It's important to make sure those incentives are aligned. At this point, if you just have maybe 1 or 2 of those, you're not really going to get the buy-in that you need. You're not going to have the differentiation that you need to stand out as a product. So make sure you understand those 4 Ps. Once again, you don't have to build every feature set from the beginning, but know what your risk reduction milestones are to show that you're making incremental progress towards where you need to go, that is actually going to capture the imagination of fundamentally the people that will use the product, the people that will make decisions based on what the product does, and the people that will pay you for the fact that you're making their lives better, easier, and having better outcomes. We were very lucky from the standpoint of an Aleo journey that we were able to fortunate to have two co-founders that I had courtside seats for their first startup. That first one was a little bit of a hammer looking for a nail. It was a tech transfer licensing opportunity. I realized it was valuable in the wound care space, and it was able to be utilized in a vascular setting, given some of the interests that we all had, and that was eventually acquired by J&J Advanced Wound Care at the time. And we were able to leverage the winnings from that, if you will, to self-fund Aleo for about the first 4 years, when we were actually a implantable company before we made the pivot to a wearable. And along that journey, that was interesting. Being able to do so meant that we could make some of those failures. We could try different things. But ultimately, we were able to listen to our partners outside of the box, if you will. But what that meant was we had to choose our investors wisely. And no matter what, you're going to find one or two that maybe you realize over the long haul who's really there for you. It's certainly about finding your tribe. We were very fortunate to think about ourselves as a platform, where we wanted to go, and brought on most of our investors, 80 or 90%, had been involved in startups that had gone on to IPO in the medical space. And so they understood that it sometimes takes 7 to 10 years to build a company and to take that time. There's always a 10% that are going to not agree with you, but there's certainly an interesting opportunity to keep pushing forward that we found incredibly valuable. But choose those investors wisely. If you want to do a licensing play, there's going to be funds that are geared towards that. If you want to, hey, I want to build it to FDA clearance and then hopefully a big corporate buys me out, there's also companies for that. Comment that I'll make though is companies are bought, not sold. So think about the long term, and if the person that you're asking money from today is someone you really want to spend 10 years with. If it's not, if the due diligence process doesn't make sense, move on. It might be painful now, but I can tell you from my own experience, it will be a lot more painful in the future if everybody's not aligned. That goes to your board as well, right? Build your board carefully. It can be really tempting to get the biggest name in the space, or I need that clinician, or I need this person that's built this big company. But think about what you really need to get to your next milestone. Somebody that's actually going to roll their sleeves up and help you make the impact that you need. You don't want all the same person. You definitely want folks that have maybe reimbursement experience, regulatory experience, fundraising experience. You also want people that you can call at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to answer an awkward due diligence request and have no idea what to do, and just say, what did you do in this situation? It's really important to have that person, because all of those people are going to help you up level and grow, because as we've heard, we don't get trained for this in medical school, right? We don't get marketing and entrepreneurship in medical school. Maybe we should, but we certainly don't today. And the last comment that I'm going to make is leadership is earned, not given. For the company that we wanted to build, I realized I couldn't be in residency, or I couldn't be, I took that year off initially, and then kept telling my very Indian parents I was going to go back every year. I think finally, after about 8 years of this, they've given up hope of that. That's okay. They now have a grandkid, so I think I've made them happy. But what I will say is we made a very conscious decision to build a business. So that went to, now that we've raised close to $40 million, now that we have almost the same number of employees as we're moving towards that milestone, you can't just assume that the same things are true when you're a 3-person company or a 10-person company or even a 20-person company, or when you just raised a seed round. You have to earn the leadership right if you want to be the CEO. And even if you want to be the co-founder or the CMO, what does leadership look like in that role? It's not given to you because you're a brilliant vascular surgeon in an amazing spot. People still need to be led. They want to be led. They want to see the vision. They want to understand why they're giving up so many other opportunities to maybe take a third of what they could make at a Google to come work with you, or why they're betting some of their salary on stock in your vision. And at the end of the day, if you're not grinding harder than they are, and at the same time, taking the time that you need maybe to rest up, to give it your all, whatever that is, whatever your leadership style is, leaning into that, being comfortable with that, taking the time to get a coach, whatever that is, to earn the right to be a leader, rather than just assuming because of all of your success through medical school, residency, being an attending, which is very much should be honored and complimented. In this world, you still have to earn that right every single day with how you treat your people and how you keep your focus on the end goal of patients and patient care and why you're making that impact at the end of the day. So thanks again for your time. Looking forward to answering your questions as well.
Dave, thanks for again a very insightful talk. You've gone a long way from a starting concept, creating technology and applying it. What comes to my mind is, did you have to pivot this? How did you find out the right application on the clinical side? Was this from the get-go you knew the clinical application, or did you have to think about different things and pivot your ideas?
So we were very focused on closing that disintermediation between patients and clinicians. That was very intentional. We started off initially in the implantable world by wrapping sensors around bypass grafts, spray painting sensors onto stents, and showcased preclinical models that we could do the entire end-to-end system. However, I think when we thought about the fact that we were intending to be effectively the Intel Inside for Stent 3.0. So Stent 1.0 is bare metal, and Stent 2.0 is drug eluting, and Stent 3.0 is going to be smart stents, and we were going to be the company to enable that. But that meant we needed partners. And there are a lot of amazing folks, but I think as we've even heard over the last two talks, medicine moves a little bit slower than tech, right? And so I think we were a little bit ahead of where the strategics were thinking about the world, and we realized we were going to miss an opportunity to impact patient care if we worked with their timeline rather than ours. So we actually, one of the folks that I had kept hearing from was a lady by the name of Terry Litchfield, who was one of the creators of Lifeline Vascular Access, and her husband had been dealing with vascular access issues as a dialysis patient and kept saying, Dave, you can't quit. I think we only had a couple months of cash in the bank. We said, well, what are we going to do? We did a company-wide hackathon, and we said, all right, how do we tackle this problem with the technology base that we've already built, with where we want to go in terms of closing that gap and focus? And that's when we made that pivot from an implantable to a wearable with the use case in mind that we had started with, but just a little bit of a different product form factor to enable the same outcomes and the right thing for patients.
Wow, this is fantastic, Dr. Karagunta, on lessons learned. So for our next speaker, Dr. Pratak Kawankar, who will discuss what makes innovation and clinical innovators investable.
So yeah, I work presently at Incube Labs, and I have academic appointments as well. So I've kind of flitted in and out of the so-called semi-permeable membrane between academia and entrepreneurship. I like early stage medtech, and I also have a consulting company. I'm going to talk about the basis from my perspective. I've done this since 1984. So I've done about 16 startups. I've raised more than $500 million for various parts of the startup. I've done devices, diagnostics, drug delivery, health IT, public companies, which I don't like to work in anymore, and 16 startups that I've been involved in different, including now I'm more of an angel investor and a venture partner and a venture fund and a commercializer as well. And I started, unlike all the other previous speakers who were excellent, I started off as an engineer. I stayed as an engineer, and I ventured out into the business world, partnering with great clinicians, which I continue doing. So I come from that perspective. Right now, Incube Labs, we are an incubator that was founded about 26 years ago. We are based both in Silicon Valley, San Jose and Milpitas, and San Antonio. Our founder, Mir Imran, has, between him and Incube Labs, founded about 23 life science companies and 2 technology companies. And in the course of that, we have had 15 exits and only 2 failures. So before coming to Incube, I was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, running an entrepreneurship venture fund, if you will, there, an accelerator. And now I'm working for this incubator, and there's a distinct difference between the two. So I just want to take 1 minute to clarify what that is. So an incubator, we at Incube, we take our ideas and we have our own ideas. We encourage the development of internal ideas. Once in a while, we'll in-license some patents to take our products and companies forward, but we bake the idea, convert it into a product. If that looks promising, we make a company out of it. And we then get our jollies when we sell that company to a Medtronic or a J&J or a Boston, which we have done many times over, or we go public with it. So in an accelerator setting, you're coming in, they accept existing companies and massage and polish you after 6 months, 9 months, a year, and put you through the ringers. And hopefully, what comes out is a newer and more polished and more successful version of what your company had been coming into an accelerator. So that's the key difference between an incubator and an accelerator that you should keep in mind when you approach these things. So examples of what we have done, we go after what we call big stuff. So typically implantable devices or combination drug delivery device combinations that are complicated, take time, take 10, 15, 20 years, take $100, $200 million to get to market. And so we do operate in that sandbox. But we have been successful over the decades. We've done a lot of stuff in cardiovascular and cardiology with embolic protection, with the Incube company in that table is PercuSurge, which is sold to Medtronic, mapping and ablation for ventricular arrhythmias. Cardiac Pathways is a company that was bought by Boston Scientific. And for example, the last two were the implantable treatment for chronic pain. We pioneered the way to modulate the dorsal root ganglia for pain modulation. And this company, Spinal Modulation, was purchased about 6-7 years ago by St. Jude Medical, which of course was purchased by Abbott shortly thereafter for about $500 million. And going all the way back to the first implantable defibrillator that our founder had worked on at Intech in Pittsburgh, that was purchased by Guidant, and now it's a big moneymaker for the whole industry, if you will. So our ecosystem is we have Incube Labs that you see in the center top. We are the incubator in this Keirutsu, if you will, that we have this ecosystem that we have of Incube companies. We have a venture fund as well. We're on Incube Ventures 3. It's not a huge fund. It's about $80 million or so. We don't typically, well, not typically, we are not the first investors in our own company. We try not to drink our own Kool-Aid. But we will come in Incube Ventures at, following some lead investor, an external lead investor to come into it. And we, of course, look at other deals, have invested in non-Incube Labs deals as well. We have Modulus, which is a manufacturing company that is ISO 13485 certified and the whole bit. So we do, they do work for Incube Labs companies, making our prototypes, making clinical ready product, as well as they do work for other companies as well. And I think Dr. Dua alluded to, as contract for hire, you can contract with Modulus to make your certain electromechanical device for FDA approval and sales. Then we have a crowdfunding platform that we run called Venture Health, which really collects pools investments from high net worth individuals, including docs as well, and then puts a vehicle together to invest in a particular deal that Incube Ventures might put more money into. So we have about 10 companies under active management and development, so to speak. So obviously these are companies that haven't gotten out yet, except the top left, Rani, and I'll allude to that just briefly, is that Rani had its IPO on NASDAQ just about 6 months ago in July at a pre-money, at a market cap of about $500 million. And it's, again, a breakthrough technology that we have worked on for a long time, for about 12 years now, in which it delivers biologics orally, which has kind of been the holy grail of pharma industry for a long time. So that's now recently been public, and that's kind of been exited out of our incubator. So this is kind of my last slide here, and I want to kind of summarize what I feel that, investor interest, what piques investor interest? What do investors look for that gets them excited? Well, obviously, the first big thing is large real market, a real market. And that you got to support by both top down and bottom up. I've seen countless presentations and pitches in which, people talk about, oh, heart failure, it's a $20 billion market. And if we just get 2% of that, we'll still be, a $200 million company, something like that. Well, that doesn't work too well. So you have to support that thesis from the top down with a bottom up analysis as well to support this, you can be very sophisticated in Excel spreadsheets of how you do the top down. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's got to be supported by reality. And you also got to demonstrate, I feel, a very in-depth, clear understanding of all aspects of the markets that you have targeted. Now, you may have to change markets, as you've heard. People have pivoted quite a few times, and that's normal. But whatever market you're going after, you better be the expert in the world of knowing that market inside out, who the customers are, who the decision makers are, what the workflow is, all that stuff. And that's only obtained by not dreaming about it, but going out and beating the bushes, if you will, talking to people, and really understanding what are the drivers in that market. The second thing, almost as important, of course, is who are the founders, who are the leadership team, or to the advisors, that's including who are on the board. What is the quality of them? What is the track record? What's the credibility? Have they done this before? For physician entrepreneurs, again, since I'd funded many years and looked at about 400 projects at Pitt and UPMC, I would say the first thing we looked at was coachability. And I think some of my earlier speakers have alluded to that. You have to be coachable. I do admire, and when I go into surgery myself, I want you to think that you're God or a goddess. But when you come out of the OR, you're trying to do the company, that needs to be dropped. So that coachability, especially in a physician entrepreneur, that is a huge, huge thing. That's probably the biggest thing I would say on this list that people look for in a physician entrepreneur. Can I work with this physician to build a business and not have it be a hobby? The other thing that I look for is this biome, if you will, for a startup in this field is three-part stool: clinical, business, and science tech. These are the core parts that have to be there, in my opinion, in a successful company. Of course, that's supported by good lawyers and accountants and all that stuff, support staff. But there have to be leaders in each of these areas who can work together to make it happen, because that's what it takes. Do you have traction as a business? Do you have focus and mind share on the business at hand? And some of you have made that jump from, okay, have made that trade-off, and I think that's a great trade-off to the speakers have alluded to. They've done the math of, hey, in my clinical practice, I can only do so many patients in my lifetime, in my career. But if I do some product or an app that can affect, 10 times, 100 times the number of patients, but then are you following that thought with action? So that's what investors will look for as well. Do you have a path to market that is validated, understood? Do you know how to scale it? What are the key risks that you face? And even when I was a young entrepreneur, I used to be hesitant to describe the risks. As like, what risk? I can overcome any kind of risk that comes across. What's the big deal? We'll figure it out. But investors have become more sophisticated over the decades I've been involved, and they look for a very clear-eyed assessment of risks. Do you recognize the key risks and maybe how to mitigate them or not? And then, of course, the last part is, how in the IT space, maybe IP is not as important as the business model. And so I've put both of them there. Do you have something that protects the secret sauce? What is the secret sauce? You don't have to tell me, but how do you protecting that secret sauce that allow you to succeed in the marketplace? The biggest credibility, of course, is clear demonstration of your product working with real customers, not just a nice looking GUI on a computer. Anyone can come up with that. But is someone actually paying you real money for your product, especially in health IT product? And are you getting traction? Is that hockey stick real? Are you generating, doubling your customer base every 6 months is a good indicator of, hey, there's some real interest for this product. So I'll stop there and I'll look forward to Q&A. You can reach me on my email, or you can reach me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the discussion further. And thanks for the opportunity to present.
Pratap, thank you very much. That was very insightful. Entrepreneurship comes to the minds of many clinicians today, including vascular surgeons. And then these are the questions that come to their mind. Just one aspect of your expertise I want to touch up in a minute or so. If you could address physicians, surgeons coming up with an entrepreneurial company, they want to approach an accelerator, not an incubator. At what stage do you think it's ripe for them to take it to an accelerator and reach out and say, hey, do you think you guys can help us accelerate or take it to the next phase?
This depends really on what hurdle you're facing. I would say be very clear on what question you want to answer as you go into approach an accelerator, because you want to know what you want to get out of it, not just go into it for the sake of pitching every week and hearing boring lectures every week and all that stuff. You have to go there with a specific goal in mind. Having said that, there are two inflection points to think about. One is Steve Blank, who's kind of regarded as a guru of startups with the National Science Foundation and the iCore program and all. I think he has a great insight into what is the role of a startup. I mean, and his thesis, which I agree with, is the sole goal of a startup is to find the business model that will succeed. That's it. And if you have ideas and you still haven't figured out the business model, that would be one big question to answer in an accelerator, because an accelerator will hopefully help you, flesh out your initial ideas, help you pivot, force you to work with different stakeholders in different markets that you're thinking about and all that stuff. And I think that is a very useful way to enter an accelerator with that end goal in mind, saying, at the end of it, I want to have a clear idea of what my business model is. So that's the kind of what people have called the nail it phase. You got to nail your business model, whatever it is, nail it. Then the second phase is the scale it. Once you nail your business model, then the critical question is, how do you crank up the volume by 100x, right? Once you have a successful business model that you think will work. Now, of course, there'll be tweaks here and there. So the scale-up part is another big part and a very important part for the company's success. So I would say those are the two big parts I would put it in. If people have that question to be answered to approach an accelerator, because then I think you will come out of a good accelerator. There are all kinds of accelerators. Make sure you choose a good one. You'll come out of it having a better chance of success. There's no guarantee, of course, in business or life, as you know, but you increase the odds of success in your favor by really focusing on what you want to answer. And those are the two big ones for a startup, nailing the business model initially and then scaling it. How the heck are you going to go from a $500,000 company to a $10 million, $20 million, $100 million company?
Thank you.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we'll go ahead and hear from our last speaker, Dr. Mccoy, regarding her experience as an innovator.
Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Let's see. Let's make sure this is all working. My name is Dr. Sophia, the founder and CEO of Voipos, and this is kind of my entrepreneurial journey with our company. See if this works. Okay, so we're here and we have a long way to go. And this is looks like the end of a journey, but really we have a long way to go, but this is where we are today. So we have completed our working prototype. So we are a mobile physician companion. Everyone's kind of talked about the electronic medical record and how it needs an upgrade. And that's really what we've been working on. It's really what we've been building out. So Voipos was designed for physicians to be able to interact with the electronic medical record on the go with voice activated commands. And it's been a long time coming. We've been working on this company for about 1.5 years. And so this talk is really, or at least my version of the talk, is to kind of tell you where we started and how we got to here. So everyone kind of starts in the beginning, right? So we call this phase 0 or step 0. It's where you're in training. So this is where you're in your residency and your fellowship, and you're kind of just, your goal is to become a surgeon or a specialist or whatever kind of doctor that you're trying to become. And along the way, everyone is kind of really focused on that. And at some point you decide that, hey, there's something that I can make better. And you kind of have this vision of what being an entrepreneur in medicine will be like. So when I was in residency, I had a mentor who said this to me. He said, sometimes you're in the OR wishing you had something to make your life easier. And then one day you go out there and build it. And I kind of always thought about that. And vascular surgery is kind of unique because it is an innovative subspecialty. We've got all the toys, we've got stents and stent grafts and, atherectomy devices. And it's just a specialty that allows for a lot of innovation. So step 1 is really finding a problem. And don't worry, there are more problems than you probably know about. So for us, I was the surgeon who was constantly getting the delinquent letters. Dr. Khan, we're going to suspend you because you haven't finished your medical records or you're behind on your charting. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. And so I would come home at the end of the day trying to avoid a suspension. And I would talk to my husband and he'd be like, I don't get it. You're at the hospital for 8 to 12 hours a day. And then you come home, you eat dinner, and then you're right back on the computer. And he's like, I don't understand. How could you always be so behind on your charting? And I told him, I was like, well, the electronic medical record it's outdated, it's inefficient, it's not mobile. It takes 7 minutes just to write vascular surgery to sign off. And he asked me, he's like, is this a Sophie problem or is this, an everyone problem? So you got to really make sure that this isn't a you problem. And in the era of technology today and social media and the way that we can connect, you've got Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Zoom meetings. We went out there and we were actually able to talk to 100 physicians, that we wouldn't normally be able to. And this is outside of the people I talk to on a daily basis. I would send messages on Facebook. I would send messages on LinkedIn. I would cold call people on Twitter. And you really can define your problem and make sure that it's not a you problem, because you want to make sure that whatever you're building, whatever your innovation is, you want to make sure that it's scalable and that you're not building something for just, the Sophie Khans of the world, because you're not really going to be able to build a company if you build something that's just for you. So that was the next phase. And then you got to really create the solution. So you use what you learn in steps 1 and 2, where you kind of iterate on the problem and you talk to other people and you realize that this isn't just someone's problem, it's kind of an everyone problem, and you start to build out your solution. And this is a long process. I mean, I remember when our company was just a PowerPoint where it was just a bunch of ideas that we wrote on, scrap pieces of paper. We made PowerPoints talking about, what we wanted to do and how we wanted to build it. And from there, you got to build your team. And your team is made up of co-founders, CTO, CMO, believers, friends and family. Everyone that believes in your mission counts as part of your team. My parents put a big chunk of money into our vision, and they're not in medicine, but they really just believed in what we were doing. And, you know, we talked to other physicians and friends and family. And a lot of times when people are investing in your company, they're investing in you as the founder. You know, they see something in you. So always take that into consideration when you're building your team. So, you know, we built our team. It's made up of myself and, you know, we have a tech lead. We have some physicians who just kind of believe in our mission, researchers, family. So you build out your team, and it's like someone else said, you want to build up people, you want people on your team that you want to work with for the next 10, 15 years, and people that kind of have the same kind of goals for you. And then be prepared to hear the word no. It does get easier. So we heard a lot of no's. We applied to several accelerators and they kind of all said no. But we didn't really let it stop us. We talked to people and they'd say things like, you're a surgeon, not a businesswoman. You're not a technical founder. So they had a problem with the fact that I wasn't the one that was writing the code. You're too early for us. You can't be successful at both. You'll have to choose one. I chose not to really listen to anybody who had to say this. And I kind of just moved on to step 6, which was iterate, rinse, repeat. Startups are like Rome. You don't build them in a day. I remember when we first started our company, Voipos was actually something that was built for the OR. It was supposed to be a way to do dictations in the OR and get your operative reports done. And now it's turned into something much different. You know, now it's a voice activated companion that's, you know, supposed to help you get done with all your, you know, your orders, your notes, everything outside of the OR, pretty much when you're driving your car, when you leave the patient's room. But that took a lot of, you know, vision changes. We originally thought we would be hardwired. You know, we put a little Alexas in all the operating rooms, and now we're changing to, well, this can go on people's, you know, home devices. And then finally, it's really important to celebrate the wins. Even the small ones deserve a victory lap. So, you know, we are at the point where now we have a prototype. We're actually able to have conversations with bigger universities, bigger hospital health systems, and say, hey, you know, we have something, you know, are you willing to let us, you know, test drive this? Are you willing to, you know, look into this? And some people are actually now turning their heads and they're saying, hey, well, now you have something that we could potentially trial. And so we're in very early stages, but you know, that's still a big win. You know, we started off again, you know, a year and a half ago, we were just a PowerPoint, and now we're having people say, hey, wait a second, this is really cool. What you guys are building is really interesting. And like people have said in the beginning, you don't necessarily have to have, you know, Voipos version, you know, 10. You just have to have something that shows proof of concept, show that you can do something that you set out to do. You know, right now our prototype just shows that we can manipulate the medical record. If I say something, I can see it showing up with the medical record. When I pull that patient's chart back up, everything that I said shows right back up. And that's, you know, it may not be the same color scheme that I want, it may not be the prettiest user interface that I want, but it shows that I'm capable of doing this and our team is capable of doing it. And ultimately, you just got to keep believing and you just got to keep going. You know, you're going to get a lot of people that are naysayers, you're going to get people that don't believe you. If you believe in your mission and you believe in the company that you're building, it's not going to be hard. It doesn't feel like work when I sit down to work on the company after a long day at work, because, you know, I love it and I'm excited about everything that we're doing. And so that's the best advice I can give anybody, is just believe in what you're doing and just keep going. And that's all I have.
Sophia, very interesting talk, very realistic journey, and something that people love to hear. Not everything glamorous, but to start with what's realistic. So thank you for really putting it out there for all of us to listen to. Just a couple of quick issues that if you could address for us. Again, just like Anahita, you work in the university program. So it has to be a journey that's very special in the sense working on a big umbrella of the university. Did you come across a venture group of the university? Did you talk to them? Was it positive? Were there things that came as conflicts working at a large institution besides their positives that you may have had? And how did you juggle the idea of a full-time job trying to do this? Did you think of going part-time? Were your colleagues collegial? Did you have to negotiate with them?
I will have to say that I was very supported by my department and my division. So I kind of went to them and I said, hey, this is really important to me. This isn't, you know, surgical innovation isn't going to be, this isn't taking away from me being a vascular surgeon. This is just how I want to expand my academic kind of my academic, how I want to be academic is I want to pursue surgical innovation. So I had a conversation. It's difficult because it's not the norm. You know, everyone kind of hires you to be a vascular surgeon. They think you're going to do X amount of surgeries. You're going to write X amount of papers a year. And then it's just a difficult thing for people to kind of get their heads around. So you just have to be patient, and you have to kind of, you know, give people latitude. You got to be like, yeah, this is still academic. This is still an academic pursuit. Working with the Office of Tech Transfer. Sorry, I'm in the lobby because it's 2:00 in the morning where I am right now. So people are leaving the lobby. Every university has an Office of Tech Transfer, or every academic one has an Office of Tech Transfer. And working with them is difficult, right? Because they want to, they're self-funded, right? So there are a few people that are working on this. They don't get any other support. They don't get government support. So they have to kind of weigh the risks and benefits of supporting your company. So when we first went to them as a PowerPoint, you know, we didn't get as much support, and I don't blame them. We were just a PowerPoint. And now that we have an MVP, they're kind of like, okay, well, now we want to help you guys a little bit more. And at first I would be really frustrated. I'd come home like, oh man, what are, you know, they're going to take, you know, X amount of percentage from our company. But then you have to kind of also give them a little bit of slack, because they are 3 people that are running this, and it's every surgeon or every physician that has an idea. And it's a lot of negotiating. You know, you have to, you know, kind of stand your ground. You know, they'll say, oh yeah, we get 50% right off the bat. And like Dr. Dua said, that's not necessarily true. You kind of work with them. And I straight out asked them, I was like, listen, like, you know, are you guys going to take everything from this? You know, if that's the case, then this is something that we need to talk about. And they were like, no, what they want to do is they want to promote you. They want you to be successful because they want the university to be successful. So it's just kind of it's a juggling game, and you just have to be patient, and you have to believe that people aren't out there to kind of, you know, take away your innovation. So.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Khan. So I'm going to open up the whole panels for some of the question answering session. I know there are a few questions from the audience, so please type in your questions. And I know Dave has been very busy answering questions, so thank you very much. Let's see, one of the questions is on how do you present your project to a potential investor and get them to invest in you? So Dave has answered some on there, and then also Pratap, but maybe some of you would like to verbalize it or take that on.
Sure, I can start. I think, you know, as I said in my comments, I just did actually a pitch workshop for a local accelerator, a life science accelerator here in San Antonio. And even after 4 months of weekly pitch practices, they were still all over the map. So it takes practice, and presenting to real investors or friends who are investors who can, in a way, that's actually a good way to approach an investor. You know, you don't directly go and ask for money. Everyone knows that you want money at some stage for your bright idea. But say, hey, you know, I really like your advice on how to improve my pitch, and do it in a friendly way instead of a formal way. At least in the beginning, you know, that doesn't work all the time as you go along. But if you're just starting out, that's a great way to build your network. It's a good way to get some friends and allies in the investment community on your side. But yeah, I mean, you know, in my 12 years as CEO of my LVAD company, which I co-invented and founded, and then sold to a public company, I have to tell you, I probably went through 2,000 pitches that every time it was tweaking. You know, there's always room for improvement. As times change, you adjust, you know, what may be workable or attractive to investors. I'll stop there and let Dave, who commented as well.
Yeah, Dave had a say, yep, go ahead.
Yeah.
Same thing, trial and error, start small, start with your friends and family. I started off this, I would pitch everybody on the plane next to me. That's probably not my natural I definitely sat in the last row of my med school class with a hoodie on and hope nobody talked to me. So it was a very different Dave that had to go be CEO, right? And so I think so I just started talking to everybody. I was like, well, what the heck? I'm never going to see them. Realizing that I was never going to see them again after I got off that plane was kind of nice. But there is a trial and error, and you just refine, because it is about friendship and conversation, just like the top said. Like, if you're not friends, once again, people are looking for, are you coachable? Do I want to spend 10 years with you? Do I want to, even for us, we didn't go the VC route very intentionally. We've got 4 or 5 cities around the country that we kind of go and have investor dinners with, and people just love hanging out with us. And quite frankly, that's how we've been able to raise money. It's like, hey, we just want to see you guys in 6 months from now again. And so it's about friendship and don't be afraid. I think I actually, last comment I'll make is the first thing I did is just when I stopped kind of doing the residency and went over to doing the entrepreneurship thing, was I went on Meetup and was like, who the heck talks about tech? And there's this thing called Tech Breakfast out in Baltimore, where literally it was like people talking about basically a demo session and their failures. And I was like, whoa, everybody else is failing too. That was really nice. I mean, you find your tribe, and you're realizing that, but at the same time, seeing them get better over 6, 8, 12 weeks. And, I can get better too. And I feel like when they ask me for my 30-second pitch of what I'm working on, I'm getting better too. And I think that just don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Everybody else is in this world is really collegial. It's not the cutthroat, gunnerific world of a lot of the journeys that we've all been on. It's a very collegial world that I think is looking to help. And I think it's also on all of us as entrepreneurs to do webinars like this and to reach out. And that's why we put our emails out here and say, reach out, come talk to us, and we're happy to help.
Great. So what's your elevator pitch, Anita or Sophie? Anything you'd like to add?
I will say, so I've been failing hard with the with the Step Up app that I mentioned earlier. You get money from all kinds of different places. I mean, I think that's important to know that, investors doesn't mean some guy in a suit across from a table, that it can be your mom, anybody can, money is money from anybody. So I think it's important to recognize that, and also be very, realistic, know what you're asking for, and be able to explain to the person that you're asking for the money from what you're going to be giving them in return, even if it's them just supporting you because they believe in your idea, like making the world a better place. People want to be a part of something like that. So when I do my elevator pitch, I actually, interestingly, I don't know how many of you write grants, but I actually approach it very similarly to the way in which I'd write like an NIH grant, for example. I give them this horrible problem. Like in the case of the Step Up thing, I'll be like, people are dying, amputations are everywhere. And someone's always got a grandma that's, almost had their leg cut off, or something that they can make personal. And then I say, I can fix that. I could save grandma. This is what I suggest. And you bring it back. So like big worldview, how it relates to the person necessarily, and all the way down. But you can't be only about that. I think, as I mentioned in my talk as well, you have to be practical as well. These are business people. They do need a return on their investment, and you can't make them feel bad about that. You can't make them feel like making money off of this is in some way against patients, which is sort of how doctors are trained to think and trained to sell. And so I think, tying it back at the very end to how it can be mutually beneficial to the patient and to the market is the way that I tend to do my pitches. And then you have everyone nodding at the end. Oh, this is a great idea. And why have we not done this? And this is not that much money that you're asking for, know who you're talking to, of course. And then of course, return, come back around to those people once you started working and give them updates, make them feel like they're part of the journey so you can get more money.
Judith, I'll just add that one of my tech advisors, she said, if you create a tech company that we were, and she said, in tech, you want to fail fast, fail cheap. And that's the mantra, to fail, so you can at least pivot and do something else. And to Pratap's point, one of, again, investor advisors told me, you go and ask for capital, you get advice. You go and ask for advice, you may get capital.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great model.
Yeah. And, there's always, as Dave mentioned and others, there's always, people are ready to help, right? I mean, the reason I'm an angel investor as well is that someone believed in my ideas and millions of dollars behind it. And, now I see it as my time to give back to the people who have this, different crazy ideas 30 years later, let's say. So I would say, there are lots of angel investors now, VCs in your town. Again, they're ready to help. And so if you want to say, hey, look, I want to sit in on a pitch, or can you introduce me to an entrepreneur that you've funded recently for your stage of company, though, don't try to duplicate a Series D pitch when you're at Series A. Depending on the stage you're at, they'll be happy to share with you and say, okay, then talk to the entrepreneur, as Shiv, you mentioned, for advice, saying, hey, please share your pitch with me. What's working. And again, people are more than happy to help, because the people who have been there and understand they are there because others have helped them as well. So yeah, go for it.
You gotta have good follow through. You just gotta be okay with being annoying. I mean, I would ask people like, oh yeah, we'll write you a check for $10,000. Something like a week later, I was like, hey, where's that check? And you have to be comfortable in your own skin. And it gets really hard. We're not trained that way. We're just, as physicians, we're not trained to go, and you're like, well, I make a good salary. Why do I need to go ask this guy for $10,000? It feels weird, but then you're like, no, I'm going to do it. And I did the same thing. Literally anybody who would listen to me, I was like, oh, I'm, developing this software. We think that the medical record is broken and doctors are pissed off, and physicians, there's physician burnout, hospitals are losing money, patients are frustrated with their care. We built this app. It's going to automate the electronic medical record. Doctors are going to get home sooner. Hospitals are going to make more money. We use voice, and we think it's a good idea. And you boil it down to something so simple, and people will listen. And then our first $10,000 check was from another physician, and he openly said, he's like, I don't expect to see this anywhere else. He's like, but I like that you're passionate about your company. He's like, I believe in you. I believe in you as a founder. And he's like, I don't care anything else about that. He's like, the way you talk about your company, and when you love your company, people will want to be part of it, right? Everybody wants to be a part of it. We call them Voipos believers, and they're just people that are excited about it. They want to support you, and so go out there and just be bold, be brave. It's very uncomfortable, but you get over that after you've asked the 12th person for money, and then people start writing you checks.
Great. So we have another question from Jay, that a medical student, second-year medical student for New Jersey Medical School. His question is, someone early stages in their career, would you advise others to pursue an MBA and become a surgeon innovator? I know a lot of us have our MBAs. So what are your thoughts? Dave stuttered his answer, and then Anida.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So I actually got my MBA because when I was a second-year medical student, I went to a talk at the American College of Surgeons where they said, back in the day, if you wanted to become a chief of a division or a chair of a division, it used to be MD, PhD, because there was all this money flying around, and that's what they were looking at. But nowadays, they did like this big study and essentially found that the majority of people who do have dual degrees have MD, MBAs, who ultimately lead in these positions, which makes sense because ultimately you're trying to lead this division into, a financially stable thing. You want to be able to speak that speak, and you want to be able to talk to administrators and get their buy-in, right? Because you want them to feel like you know what you're talking about. So I got it because I needed the letters to kind of have that stamp, and it has paid me dividends. I don't know personally, though, so as a medical student, I don't know if it would be worthwhile. I feel like, at least for me, medical school and even residency was really about just, getting your medical chops, understanding everything, not getting distracted. You don't want to suck at everything, right? Because you're not really a business person. I'm not a business person. I am a surgeon first and foremost. That's why it's the third degree on there, not the first one. And so, but you don't want to be like, oh, you can't do medicine and you don't really know anything about the MBA. And the MBA aspect of it, actually, my husband is got an MBA from Kellogg in Northwestern, and he always says the real point of it was to make that network and those connections. And he goes back to those people repeatedly, and they're the ones that are investing, and they're the ones that have connections and everywhere from the White House all the way to, all over the country. So I would suggest as a medical student that you finish your medical school. You also don't want to be distracted, for residency interviews, people are going to say, well, what do you actually want to do? Because one of the most fearful things of getting a resident who matches is that they're going to quit. So people are concerned about that. And so, I say you do that. And then once you get into residency, most residencies, especially the big academic ones, will give you 1 to 2 years of time to do research. But you can do anything you want in that. And there's actually medical innovation fellowships. Stanford is an example of that, biodesign fellowship that you can come and do. And you can, in that time, get an MBA if you wish, as long as you're not looking to go to, Duke or something of that nature. If you just want the letters and the understanding, there are ways to do that. Just make sure that your MBA is accredited. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
So that would be my advice.
Anita, very good. I mean, I'll tell you, I was an MBA at Columbia, and my dean at graduation said, let me tell you, the word MBA will become so common, people will have it. What you do with it will matter. And you take one thing from Columbia campus is your network, and that's all you can take. You can forget everything you learned for the 2 years that you were here. And essentially, my advice often is that ultimately you realize to start up or be an entrepreneur, you need certain skills, and resources have become much more common than what a business school can give you through lectures or online. And resources are available everywhere. It's about talking to people, finding out what you need, developing your network. Certainly MBA gives you a core understanding of what business is about. So not to diminish the importance of expensive MBAs like Columbia's and NYU's $180,000, $190,000 for an MBA. But you can learn a lot of core skills of entrepreneurship by being resourceful, pretty much cheap, talking to people, finding it online. So as a medical student, don't run after an MBA just for the sake of it. Run after the concept or the idea that you have in mind.
I agree 100%. I actually I'm an MD MBA, just like many of you. I got my MBA about 15 years after residency, after I had a real world experience. And I think it's important to base your real world experience. So my project was about value-based healthcare. I went to University of Michigan, Ross Business School. So very smart people. And I learned so much from my business partners and from the professors. And I had a very good idea what I want to do when I went to business school. So I was focusing on projects. It wasn't really just to get the letters, and I really was the experience. We had a lot of experiential in terms of our business school. So the value is there, but it's more of, a personal journey and personal professional growth. So let me see if we have any other questions.
No, I mean, just to add to your comment, Judith, I think
Yes.
I was just going to say the same thing. But from my perspective, don't go collecting degrees after your name. If you want to go into innovation and entrepreneurship, if you're being a medical student now, make sure you become a great doc first, then think about others. Because once you build that leg of the stool that you're a great doc, then okay, you can think of branching out. But if you just come to me as med student, I graduated med school, then I got my MBA. As an investor, I'm sorry, it's not going to fly. As an inventor, entrepreneur, if you want to go into academic medicine and administration, that's a different story. But I totally agree with what you're saying.
One
Great,
quick comment I make, sorry, Dr. Lin, is money is cheap, time is expensive. It's 2 years of your life, or maybe 3 years of your life. Don't forget that in terms of what you want to do. Once again, if you're like, hey, I have this burning desire to solve a problem, I need to go get an MBA to build a business, the problem might not be there anymore.
That's right. Very well said. Well, it looks like we're coming to an end. And so during the last hour, we learned from entrepreneurs, physician founders about innovation, startups, and venture capital. So these exciting new technology can affect your future and in your current practice. So given the surge in the COVID pandemic and the rise in the new variants, we need to find new ways to advance our medical sciences. And I truly hope that we've opened our discussions in this innovation to improve our specialty in vascular care for our patient. So be well, stay safe, and let's stay digital and go virtual. Thank you.